Welcome to Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. My name is Amber Ireland, and I'm here with my co-host, Jill Bucaro. Let's get started.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Guided by Third Wheel. Amber and I today thought that we would talk a little bit about change. So we know change is inevitable in life, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it. It's something we all deal with. And Amber and I were talking before we started that it seems like sometimes like change comes and it like smacks you in the face. Like it falls out of the sky like an asteroid and like knocks you down, and it's like, oh shit, I did not see this coming, but like change is needed, right? And sometimes it's like change is really obvious. Like it's right there, like on a billboard in front of you. It's like flashing in the sky. And you're like, I'm going to keep my eyes all the way closed and not notice. I'm not going to look at the change. I'm just going to pretend like it is not literally like vibrating around me that a change is needed. And then sometimes, which I think is the goal most of the time, would be like when we are starting to like really tune in to our inner knowing and being like, hey, I think this adjustment would be good.
Right.
I can see something coming down the pike that I would like to make a change. I think we wanted to talk a little bit about that, maybe share some examples from our own lives. Yay, change.
Yeah. And little changes and big changes, you know, they all hit us it kind of in the same way, just maybe not as impactful for the long haul. But, you know, even changes just to like your daily routine and stuff. And how do you handle that? You know, what do you do when something gets changed up? Do you immediately, my whole day is ruined and catastrophize, you know, one change? Or are you able to say, well, I wonder why that happened, you know, and let me just, you know, continue to move through it. So I think, you know, that mindset piece is so important when we look at change, because I know a lot of people who, for whatever reason, they just don't believe that life is going to change. Like they're like, I got this job and this will be forever. I have this partner and this will be forever. I am a parent and this will be forever. I am, you know, it's like we hold on to those external identities almost, and we are not willing to look at the fact that those are ever changing. Like those are going to come and go, and that's okay, because who wants to be the same their entire life? Like how boring would that be?
I think it's boring, but I think also for some people there's some comfort in that. And I used to be one of those people. I mean, I used to be one of those people that every time something changed, I was just like awestruck. Like I was just like shocked and appalled. Like, what do you mean that this is changing? And I think that's like a hard thing to get over. And I wonder if some of that has to do with temperament or personality. For me, I am someone always who, like, I always say, like, I struggle in transitions, right? Like when it's time for me to do something, like if I've been doing a task and it's time to switch to another task, like that always is just like a little bit of stress for me. I think that's just like how my brain works and my processing works for sure. I struggle when I get interrupted. I struggle when like I have like a vision for how I wanted my day to go or my schedule to be, and like, you know, shit gets messed up. And so I think it can be jarring for people. Right. And it's like, how do you, like, knowing yourself, like me, like knowing that I love control, knowing that I love to plan, knowing that I love to like check things off the to-do list and check the little boxes. Like, how do I know that about myself, right? And those are strengths in a lot of spaces. But how do I also like remain open to like the inevitable variations and changes that are going to come along in my life?
Right. Yeah. And that's, as you were talking, I was thinking about myself. Where is my hang up when there is change? Like if I start to go down that catastrophizing route of like, oh no, everything's wrong. My hang up really is that I had everything lined up in my mind of how it was supposed to go. Like I had already created the plan, and it's that control, it's that perfectionism.
Yes.
And that gets, you know, kind of pulled away. And also, I never really had control. I had just made that up in my mind in the first place. So, you know, just being able to recognize that the feelings that I'm having, and largely it's like shame and guilt, right? Because clearly I wasn't good enough, and clearly I didn't plan enough, and clearly I didn't have enough control, and I didn't set the right things into motion. I can then take a step back and say, no, you don't have to have that shame and guilt because it was never within your control. Yes, you were trying to help move something forward. You had the best of intentions, but now this change has occurred and it's not your fault.
Right, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think those of us that are good at executing, that have type A personalities,
Right.
that are good enough at that kind of stuff that we can like pretend we do have some control sometimes, right? I think that's why that journey to surrender is so hard for some people, right? Because you're like controlling, and it doesn't go the way that you wanted.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I just didn't control it the right way.
Yes.
I just needed to do X instead of Y. I just needed to do B instead of C. So then you like come at it again, like with like even more control, right? Like even more just like single-minded fucking, I will make this be the way that it needs to be. And then it doesn't happen again. And you could say like, oh, perhaps I just need to like surrender, right? Perhaps I just need to understand. But I think for me, like sometimes I'll ratchet it up like 4, 5, 6 times before I'm finally like, Jill, you are beating a dead horse. Like it doesn't matter how smart you are, how creative you are, how much you plan for all these different scenarios, like what's going to be will be, and you need to let go. Like you are the maker of your own misery here,
Right.
Because you won't just accept it. But I think that's a hard journey for a lot of us, and I think we ratchet up the control several times before we're willing to give in to the surrender.
Yeah.
At least in my experience.
Yeah. And I think in giving into that surrender, like finally getting to the point where you can say like, you know, I'm not going to continue to try to control this. You also find a little bit of control within yourself, right? Because I can control me, right? I can control the way that I react to this. I can control the emotions that I'm going to have, what I'm going to allow this, the space I'm going to allow this thing to take in my life.
Right.
And so you get true control, which is the control you have over yourself and the knowing of yourself, if you want to call it control. But that's the only control you have. I mean, we talk about it all the time. What can you control? I can only control myself. I can control my own emotions. I can control my own actions, right? And when you can finally surrender and say, like, I'm not going to try to control this situation, these people, this relationship, this job, this whatever, then you start finding that strength within yourself so that the next time a change comes up, you're more easy to be like, okay, what can I actually control? How am I choosing to feel about this? How am I choosing to see this situation? Is this really my problem? Right? If this change occurs, do I allow the change to happen and move through it? Or am I going to white knuckle it and be like, no, this never, like,
never.
We are staying the same. And we know that when we white knuckle it like that, we create our own misery. We create our own anxiety. When we can let go, we can let go of some of that.
Yeah. And I think like what we're talking a little bit about here too is like rigidity. And we talked about this. I still think about, this was, I don't know, 3 or 4 podcasts ago. And I still think about it in my own life. And I think again, when we are trying to control, like we often have like an outcome painted in our mind, right? Like we which I think is good. I think it's good to have goals. I think it's good to have that. But I think, and we were talking about in the previous podcast, where it's like, let's say we're like manifesting, like, I want this car, I want this car, I want this car, right? And in your mind, the car is purple. And then like the universe literally hands you on a silver platter. And also you've worked hard for a car, but this car is blue. And it's the exact car that you want. It's perfect for you. It will do everything you need it to do. But the color is just a little bit different than you were anticipating in your brain.
Right.
And we're like, this car is disgusting and useless. And I hate it, and I don't want it, and it is literally right here in front of me. The keys are in my hand, and I am like, fuck this car. Why does the universe hate me? Why can't I have the purple car that I had envisioned in my brain?
Right.
And that's some of that rigidity, right? That's what you have to let go of as well, too, to be able to embrace change and to be able just to embrace the rhythm of the world and the way that it works out. Like, we are never going to ever be able to picture in our minds what's going to happen for us, right? The people that we love that show up, the opportunities that come our way work-wise, right? The way that our kids look and act and behave, like none of that can be pictured or predicted.
Right.
And when you are so tied, like so rigidly tied to like the vision you had in your head, it's going to keep you from like tuning in and embracing the joy of what you actually have in front of you.
Right. And embracing additional opportunities to have more abundance in your life, more experiences in your life, because you're like, well, I can't have that experience because I am A, B, and C.
Right.
This is who I am. This is where this is where I live. This is the car I drive. This is the person I'm, and you just miss out on things because you won't be open to potentially changing.
Exactly. Like you're not willing to deviate from that script in your brain. And I think that's one of the things where I fake it till I make it. And I know you don't like when I say that I fake things till I make them. But one thing I've been thinking a lot about lately is like curiosity, like being open. One of the things I like about myself is that I'm a very decisive person. Like I do not typically agonize. I'm not a big agonizer. Like I like see a situation. I'm like, this is what I want to do, right? This is the decision I'm going to make.
Right.
Like I'm quick. Sometimes that can lend itself to impulsivity, not always the best, but I am a decisive person. But I think what I'm trying to do now is just to be curious. Like, let me explore more. Like, let me learn more about this. Let me not, like, immediately kick it to the side because it doesn't fit with what I had in my head, right? Or it doesn't seem like it's right for me because this is, like, the rigid idea I have about myself and what I want and who I am in my brain. And let me just be curious. Like, does this make me feel happy? Does this make me feel good? Does this make me feel safe? Am I enjoying this? Being curious about some of that stuff instead of just being like, well, this doesn't fit. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't fit the Jill autobiography that I've already written, at age 34. So that is one thing that I've been trying to do. And I do think that like a curious mindset makes you better positioned to embrace some of the changes that are inevitably going to come.
Yeah. I think we talked about this in another podcast too, about there are a few different types of people and how they embrace change, right? And there are folks who will either take a change that's given to them or be able to see that kind of like inner knowing of like there needs to be a change made here and I'm willing to make it, right?
Yes.
Whether there's, fear around that or whatever. And those people generally, they're taking responsibility, right? They're taking responsibility for the change in their life. They're taking responsibility for their actions, for how they have played into, the changes that are coming. They take responsibility for the fact that just natural changes that happen in their life. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, I see this. It might still be hard, but I understand that I'm a part of this. And then you've got people who constantly get what they perceive as change thrown at them. That change where it's like someone else has determined that this job ended, this relationship ended, that you are, you go to the doctor and you have a health issue and now the change is you have to do this new regimen or whatever the case may be. And they wait until that point. Now they probably had a little bit, because I think everyone sort of has that little inkling sometimes that like, things are not correct. Let me, I might need to do something, right? But they're the people that'll double down and say, nope, this is how it's always been. I will do it this way. And they feel like change has been thrown at them. And I think that for people that experience that a lot, it is important that you take a step back and reflect on whether or not you're really taking responsibility, or if you're waiting for somebody to hand you the change so you can blame them for it. Because if you get to a place where you're constantly blaming people for everything that changes in your life, that makes me sad that somebody would live that way, because it kind of pits you against everything in your life, because change is going to come. You're kind of like putting your head in the sand and saying like, nothing has to change, but all these things did change because somehow, the universe is conspiring against me. And that's not the case at all. The universe is conspiring for your highest good. And if you would just open your eyes and look at it, and take those opportunities, you can kind of pull yourself out of some of that misery.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking like two things. The first thing I'm thinking is that, and I've been in this place, like I think there are people, me included, that sometimes like we are so uncomfortable or unhappy that we like dissociate ourselves from reality so much that those inklings that you're talking about, like we aren't
Yes.
even checked in enough to feel them.
Right.
That like literally like Rome is burning and we have no idea, we are
Right.
like, there is no fire, like
Right.
silly goose. Like, so I do think like the first part of that, if you are someone who you feel like struggles with change or you feel like you're just getting like slapped left and right, like
Right.
you don't see it coming. And that's something that has been a never ending struggle for me in my life, is to stay tuned in, right? To stay aware. Some of us, like, I think, again, it's temperament. It's what happened to us in childhood. It's some of us I think some of us with really good imaginations, like we are so good at checking out of life.
Right.
At just
Right.
like literally our body is here, but like our brain is like in the stratosphere.
Yes.
And
I love that place.
I love it. Oh my God, it's so much better than here, right? But it causes you to, it's not like, oh, I'm ignoring the inkling. It's like, I'm not even having the inkling because
Right.
I'm not present enough to even get it.
Yeah.
And so for me, as someone who, has missed a lot of inklings because I was, floating around in outer space while my whole ass life was happening down here, that is to me like the biggest thing that I'm always trying to do is to like stay present and to like not create a story about what's going on, but really like look and say, what is happening right now, right? And try to think about that. And then I think the other thing that we have to think about too is fear, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of us have been in a space where we are tuned in and we have the inklings and we know something needs to change. But the thought of having that conversation, of quitting
yes.
that job,
Yep.
of doing that is so terrifying that you're like, certainly this like miserable discomfort that I am living in sucks, but it's better than doing that.
Right. Right.
And I think then what happens is we avoid and we put off, right? And we don't do it. But then the universe hits us so hard and makes us so uncomfortable. It's almost like that rock bottom, right? That then making the change is the only thing, even though it sounds fucking awful, it's still not quite as fucking awful as where we're at right now. But we've let ourselves get to a point where it's so fucking awful.
Yeah. That, and you know that you need to change, And because you know it internally, right, and you're afraid to do it, you're still acting as if this is a terrible thing, right? Your actions throughout this relationship, this job, this whatever, is still portraying to everyone around you that you are not happy.
Right.
And so sometimes you create those smacks in the face because the other person has less fear than you.
Yeah.
And is like, hey, I'm not super down with this. Right?
Right. And I think that's what we talk about when we talk about self-sabotaging. And that's what that is. And I think a lot of us self-sabotage when we're not brave enough to make the change.
Right.
But we're like brave enough to like cause some ripples, right? Like we're brave enough to maybe goad the other person into making the change, right? Like we start ignoring our partner, we start picking fights about little things, we start like popping off at work, we start checking out at work and not doing our job, we start like ignoring that friend's text messages or phone calls, right? Like we're not willing to like address the big change that needs to be done, but we start engaging in some of these sabotaging behaviors, to your point, hoping the other party will be brave enough to institute the change.
Right.
And I think, again, that is something that can be done very consciously, and that's something that can be done unconsciously as well.
Yeah. I think more often than not, it's subconscious, when you're doing it. And then after it happens, right, you're like, oh, shit, I wasn't good enough. I was like, I'm a piece of shit. I've done something wrong. I've whatever. When at the beginning of all this, you didn't want it in the first place. But now you're like guilting and shaming yourself that you weren't good enough for this thing you didn't even want.
Yes. I've definitely done that in relationships, right? Where it's like, deep down inside, not that I'm paying attention, right? Because I am, again, floating off in outer space. But deep down inside, it's like, oh, man, something's not right here, right? Like, this isn't jiving. I'm, like, straight up not having a good time, right? Like, something's going on. And then I think subtly, subconsciously, I start like, picking at the relationship, right? Picking at the connection, right? Causing problems, getting mad, checking out, da da da. And then, the person catches on to that, right? Because they're not like an idiot. I've dated some idiots, but most of the time not. They catch on to that. And they're like, oh, like she hates me, right? Or like she's sick of me, or like we need to have a conversation about this. And then they bring it up and I'm like, what are you talking about, right? And it's like, Jesus, Jill, like stop being so crazy. But I think we do that in all sorts of ways. I see people do it at work all the time. Like when they're unhappy in a job, it's just like the sabotaging and the fighting. And I've watched myself do it.
Yeah.
And the people closest to me around me have been like, Jill, you clearly didn't like him. Like it was so obvious because of X, Y, and Z. But then I get to be, to your point, be like, poor me.
Yes.
Just here, living my best life, and this asshole comes, and breaks up with me after everything that I've been doing. Again, I think that's where it's why the checking in is so important.
Yes.
The being honest with yourself. Like to me, the first step in everything is like trying to be present, trying to check into what you're really feeling, what you're really wanting.
Yeah. 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 And I think when you're starting to feel that, I think everybody, it's probably a little different. Some people feel that discomfort. They feel it kind of like, it's like a heaviness in your chest, or it's a, like
the
your
pit
belly.
in your stomach.
Yeah. You're not sleeping well at night.
No.
Things like that are starting to happen. And to take that moment to like sit down and be like, okay, all right, body, why are we here? Why do we feel like this right now? And really thinking through what that feeling is can help you ground down, can help you be more present in the moment, and help you make better decisions on what you want to do moving forward. And maybe you're not at a place where you're like, I am willing to be afraid and do this anyway. But at least you know that.
Yes.
You can be more conscious about what is happening. And that's kind of the first step. It's not to say, like, if you have a really hard time with change, your journey has not led you to a place yet where you're able to actively make those changes for yourself, that you're intuitively knowing, and then you're able to make the change, and then you can see how the change was good for you on the other side. If you're not there yet, the first step really is to check in when you start having those physical and psychological symptoms of, oh, something is not right.
Yes.
And see what it really is. And notice whether or not when you check in, do you start to catastrophize everything? Because, when we check in, that means, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to kind of like think and I'm going to like feel into my body, right? And then sometimes I have like the racing thoughts where it's like,
oh my God.
And then just being curious, like you said, about that. Oh, well, I know what that is. Like, I'm making this into something way bigger than it probably ever will be.
Yes.
Right? And also, if it's this big, can I handle it? Of course.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's another good thing too that I would challenge people to do, and something that I think has really helped me, is to recognize what are some of those like physical and psychological signs that something is out of alignment, that you've like gotten out of your groove. For me, like, and I think this is a big one for people, I know that I'm really struggling with anxiety when I do like the 2 to 3 a.m. wake up. Do you ever do like where you wake up at 2 or 3 and you're awake till 5 and then you can finally go back to sleep, like that the sun is rising and like, but it's just like utter panic for the 2 hours in there. To me, that's a big thing. I am a good sleeper. Not everybody's a good sleeper, but I'm a good sleeper. But when I have, and sometimes you just have a wake up, whatever. But if I have 2 or 3 in a week,
right,
I'm like, woo woo, sound the alarm bells, right? Like that my body is giving me a clue.
Right.
I also always get sick. I like get an upper respiratory infection every time that I'm like very, very stressed. How do you know that you're getting out of alignment?
I just feels like a heaviness in my body where I'm like, oh, why does my heart feel so heavy? Why can't I focus on the things that I normally would be able to focus on? Like my mind is racing around other topics. When I become avoidant of doing my spiritual practice, I know that that's a huge red flag, because what I'm avoiding is that information, right? Because my spiritual practice has to do with journaling and meditating and receiving that information. And so if I'm trying to avoid that, if I'm like making all kinds of excuses as to why I don't need to do that today, or I don't have enough time or whatever, now I can kind of click in like, oh, Amber, why are you avoiding this? What don't you want to know?
Yes, I think that avoiding piece is huge. For me, like, I really, when I'm not in a good place, I pivot from all of my like good and healthy hobbies to all of my like shitty and terrible numbing behaviors. When I'm in a bad place, I don't ever want to read for fun. Like I love to read fiction, but I will never read. I will also avoid like my morning like spiritual practice, journaling, all of that stuff. Because I just, it's like I feel like I don't have the strength for it. I don't listen to podcasts usually. Like I can tell I'm in a bad place when all I want to do is like scroll social media, listen to music while I get ready, as opposed to like a podcast or the news, right? Or something that would like involve me like engaging.
Right.
I just want to be like dead inside. That's a big one for me too. And I think it's important to know that. And sometimes like we know it and it's like, I don't have the strength to do something about it right now, right? Like I'll definitely have times in my life where I'm like, this has been a tough couple weeks. Maybe it's not the anxiety, maybe it's more the depression. And I know it's an issue. I'm recognizing it's an issue. I don't really feel like I have the strength to deal with it now. I know because I've been alive and in this brain and in this body for 34 years. I know the strength will come. Right. So let me capitalize on it when it does. But again, I think it's that awareness. I think some people like food and diet falls off a lot. Like we start like eating to numb, right? We start overeating, eating really sweet foods, things like that. People drop off exercise. I know for me, I can get really resentful. Like when I start to just get really resentful of people around me and at work, that's how I know that I'm not always in a good space. And so just being able, I think, to know some of those cues has been transformational for me.
Yeah. Another thing that for me would be like, I'm not an irritable person in general anymore. And I say anymore because there was a good chunk of my life where I was irritated by literally everything.
Yes.
But I don't normally sit in that space. So if I find myself becoming like irritated over normal daily things, I know something is wrong. I know something is off. And also when I become more kind of like stoic in my feelings, I know something is off. Because a lot of times when I'm avoiding my spiritual practice and I'm avoiding doing the things that I would normally do, it's also, I want to avoid feeling. I want to avoid a release of crying. I want, it's like all of those pieces. And so when I'm not doing that, and I can start to feel myself kind of putting the shell back up.
Yes, the wall is being built.
Right.
Yes.
Right. But I mean, to your point earlier, some people aren't there yet. They don't even recognize that there's a difference between the wall being down and the wall being up.
Yes.
And that's where, some of that inner work comes from. And that's where learning yourself as you're going through changes, instead of being like, this change is so awful and I want to put it behind me as fast as humanly possible. Right. Really being able to like sit in it, reflect on it. How did I feel? What happened? Could this have been different? Just looking at all of those pieces will help you the next time through.
Yes, I think so too. Change is inevitable, right? Like it is going to come. It is going to come unexpectedly, but more often than not, you've had some inklings, right? And you can prepare for it and pivot and do all of those things that those of us that like control believe that we can do to be like, get an A+ at navigating the change. But I think, the biggest piece is like to start to build that awareness. And another thing that you and I say all the time that we say in our leadership trainings is that discomfort creates change, right? And I also think in that same vein, discomfort is an indicator of change, that change is coming. So how are you tapping into that? How are you being aware of that? And how are you, just facing life, I feel like, in this open, curious way that leaves room for flexibility and navigation and all of that good stuff. Just so much, so much easier said than done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What are some changes that you feel like you've implemented that you saw maybe coming down the pike? Or maybe that you hit a rock bottom? Like, what are some changes that you've been grateful for in your life? Because I think sometimes we're like, change equals bad, let's make the best of it, right? But like, what are some things that have really been transformative in a good way for you, change-wise?
So many things. And I say this, so many things, but also recognizing that at this point in my life, I can see how that worked. And at the time, I couldn't.
Yes.
Right? Changes that have happened to me over the last probably 5 years or so, I'm a little bit more present in the change process, and I'm able to like say, oh, okay, this is an opportunity for me. Cool. Let's move forward, right? Before that, changes were smacking me in the face left and right. Like it was like I was, some kind of in a weird dodgeball game, losing badly. And I think that, relationships ending, even when I didn't choose for them to end, were huge changes for me that now I see kind of like how that served me for a period of time and also taught me how to trust myself more. Yes. And how to be more independent. You know, in my lifetime, as I grew up, I had a child at 17. So I was never alone up until the point that I was 41, that I was like literally no children in the home, no partner. I was responsible for me. Right. And up until the point that I was like about 39, I had never had children in my home without someone else there to help support me. And so through those changes in relationships, I have really learned how to rely on myself more. And I like who I am more, because before it was like I was always trying to like fit into somebody else's picture of me so I could stay in that relationship because I did not believe that I could take care of myself independently. Right? Sure. So I was like holding on to things. And now I feel like, you know, with those changes happening, I've learned that, yes, I love to be in partnership with other people. Yes, I love to be in a relationship with other people. And also, if that were to end because it was not for my highest good, I would still be okay. Right. There have been, you know, obviously changes with jobs where I've ended one job and gone to another unexpectedly. And just the amount of work I had to do in between, right? Because I was, you know, that change was handed to me. And I was like, oh shit, like this has never happened to me before. And also like, I must not be good enough. How am I ever going to be good enough to get another job or at that level or whatever? And now, again, it just kind of like bolstered that self-esteem that like I am good enough to do this. And also like the additional relationships I was able to make and the different connections and the different skills I was able to build that looking back, I know would have never been afforded to me in those places that I was before.
Yes. And that hindsight is like so nice. You know, that hindsight is good. And I think like the changes that smack you in the face are also good because they allow you to look back and say like, wow, it felt horrible then, but like now it really was, like you said, for my highest good. And it has given me some of the skills and the confidence and the reassurance that maybe will allow me to make the change before it smacks me in the face the next time. You know, we've talked about this in our first couple podcasts. We kind of had similar experiences like work-wise, right? Where work ended unexpectedly. And kind of the same thing like with relationships. Like forever I was oriented towards like, let me preserve the connection, like at all costs, right? To me, and my sanity and my dignity, right? And my health and all of the things about me. But having tried to do all of that and losing the job anyways, right, I think gave me some confidence. Like when I had a work issue in the last couple of months, like I was like, I don't want to leave, or I don't want this to change. I don't want this to go down in like a ball of flames, right? But I know that when that happens, I'm still okay, number one, and it gives me the confidence to stand up for myself, to say like, hey, this is what I need, or this is what I think our program needs, right? And this is where we're at. It gives you that confidence to maybe instigate some change, right? Because for so long I was like, I don't want to do anything for fear of the change that it might create. And now I'm like, no, I'm going to stand up for myself, for my principles, for my values, understanding that me having this hard conversation or doing this thing might require change on the back end because you're less scared. Right.
When I experience change now, largely, I mean, it's not perfect because sometimes some things happen and I'm like, oh, let me just melt into a little bit of a puddle here for a minute. But largely when things change, I immediately, I'm like, oh, this is annoying. And then I'm like, I wonder what's coming next. Because I know it's going to be better.
You've moved from fear to curiosity.
Yeah. It's like I just know, like in my soul, like this is going to be better. Like I'm excited to see what's coming. And then when the next thing comes, I'm like, ooh, look at you. Look at you.
That's that curiosity piece. And that's what I try to, and I think sometimes I say it like jokingly, right? Like when I'm pissed at work or like, so I'm always like, I'm just curious. I'm just remaining curious, right? Probably if anybody that works with me or is my friend listens to this, they're like, oh, Jill like says she's curious, but is mostly like, mocking herself and everyone else around her. But I do think when it comes to change, that's the orientation you need to have. Is one, like, let me be true to myself, stay checked into myself so I know what the fuck I'm actually thinking and feeling. And let me be curious and excited about what is to come.
Right. It plays into gratitude, right?
Yes.
Now I can be grateful for the change instead of being resentful for the change. I can be grateful for an opportunity to do things, see things differently. Whereas otherwise, I would just be pissed off at everyone and myself, and I sit in my own misery until the next thing comes. And then hopefully I can see that it's better, and maybe not. Maybe I'm still resentful and I'm like, I want it to be the way it used to be. Like,
But it's like very rarely, and I'd be curious, and I want somebody to like push back on me on this. Very rarely, like when you've gone through the healing and you've gone through the pain and you come out the other side, when do you ever really truly want things to be the way they were
never.
versus now?
Never.
I can't think of a time. So somebody tell me I'm wrong, but it's like, and even when you're like in just the depths of the pain, deep down you still know this is better now than what it was before.
Right.
So I think like, to me, that's the takeaway, is like curious instead of fearful and grateful instead of resentful. And like, that's the orientation for change.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Do you want to pull a card?
Yeah.
We didn't do a card on or maybe 2 months ago.
No, 2 ago we did not, because we pulled all of the interview cards.
Oh, we pulled all the interview cards.
That was enough cards for us all.
We were carded out.
Do you have a deck? Ooh, let's do this one.
I was eyeing your new animal cards. Those are new, yes?
So these are tarot cards, but they're kind of like I don't know, I feel like they're a blend of tarot and oracle. They're called Animal Guides Tarot, and I got this. It is a quarterly subscription box, which if you know me, I love a subscription box. Like, I love a thing to come to me in the mail with some stuff I don't know that it's in there. But this is through Hay House, and they send you like 3 decks every quarter. It was real cute. One of the decks, I'm still working with that, but the other 2 I really enjoy. So,
nice.
I'm going to end up with a bunch of decks. So if you know me, you'll probably receive them as gifts.
I was going to say, you can give them away to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have 2 decks that I feel like they're not my deck. Like, I feel like I'm just like holding on to them for now, and they need to find their home. So if anybody needs a deck, let me know. Maybe they're yours.
Yep. Okay, let's all take a deep breath together. And release. And set the intention that you'll receive exactly what you need from this podcast and this card reading today. And that hopefully you've received some wisdom or sparked some interest on how you can navigate change more effectively in your own life, so that you can experience some more joy through change, some more curiosity through change, instead of fear and shame.
Exactly. I mean, my whole life is avoiding fear and shame, Yep. That's the goal.
Yep. I definitely, those are 2 things that like to pop up for me as well. There we go.
Those are my favorite 2 emotions also. Yep. All right, what we got?
We have the 9 of Earth, which has this like cute cat sitting on I know, aren't these the cutest?
I love a cat.
It's like a little white cat sitting on the side of a sofa. And the message that this cat is bringing us today is, your success has brought you financial security and the reward of a much-deserved time off to enjoy your own company. You may suddenly have a brilliant idea for a business or a self-employment opportunity that will be very successful. And I think as we talk about this with change, a lot of times things come to us, right? We get these opportunities presented to us. We are successful in what we're doing, but it is different. And so we don't trust it.
Yes.
Right? We don't trust that this opportunity is really for me, or this success is real, and that the other shoe isn't going to drop and somebody's going to be like, aha! You are an imposter, right?
Yes.
So I think this is really saying, sit in that. And be okay with that change, and be okay with the discomfort of leveling up.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because no matter what is going on in your life, there is growth happening. And you have to trust that. And you have to go ahead and be okay with the change of growth, because growth doesn't happen unless you're willing to allow the change.
Yes, the discomfort of leveling up. We should totally do that for our next podcast.
Oh, gosh.
That'll be a good one, but we are at the end of this one. So thank you, everybody, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Guided by Third Wheel, the podcast. We would be honored if you would like, rate, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, be well.